Hi, welcome to the Ithihasa channel. Today I'm going to talk about some of the wondrous stories of the Rishis of Bharatvarsha. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Om Subramanyaya Namaha, Swami Sharanamayyappo, Om Guruve Namaha. So the Mahabharata describes some of the beautiful lives of the rishis and the exciting stories surrounding them at different points in time. Today I'm going to talk to you about two of those rishis. Now, when you think of a rishi of the past of those days, what's the description that comes to your mind? One of two descriptions. One is a slightly rotund, obese rishi with white hair, tied up in a knot, sitting in front of the yajnas or the chanting hymns, shlokas, Vedas, and teaching people in a gurukul under the blessing of some king, which is being run under the blessing of some king, or cursing people who cross his path and maybe blessing some of them. That's one description. And the other would be a very scrawny bag of bones rishi who is sitting in the Himalayas doing intense tapasya and penance, and with hollow cheeks and hollow abdomen, and absolutely all the time thinking about meditation and something like that. Well, these two descriptions that I've just mentioned would be the outliers if you could consider the actual description of the rishis in those times. So how would a normal rishi of those times be? So these rishis were wondrous human beings with the average rishi's lifespan ranging from somewhere around 200 to 300 years to phenomenal rishis of the time who lived for thousands of years, 3, 4, 5,000 years. Because they transcended from Satya Yuga all the way down to Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga. So these rishis had absolutely wondrous lives of those times. And how did they look? So an average rishi would be tall, handsome, well-built, quite muscular, clear face, as young-looking as ever, twinkle in the eye, a smile on the face, long hair, sometimes knotted up fully, sometimes halfway up with their hair billowing in the breeze, six packs for abdomens, and muscular legs. These rishis never missed leg day. They would traverse the length and breadth of Bharatvarsha, walking up and down the country at a pace that would be equivalent to a slow gallop of a horse. Tough men. And they would have wonderful clear skin with hues ranging from very fair to quite dark. The very dark ones being the most handsome and the most desirable, if you may say so. And they would always have a smile and they'd be ready to teach you something. And very rarely would they give you a curse if you really cross their path. Somehow that's the part of the rishis that always get highlighted, the curse that they used to give. And their mind would be extremely brilliant. Their mind could put a supercomputer of today to shame. They could listen to hundreds of thousands of shlokas once and learn it by heart and recount it verbatim in absolutely the same way and order that you recited it to them. And extremely smart and intelligent with an extremely brilliant sense of direction. They used to travel across the country teaching people in various gurukuls and their own, setting up gurukuls across the country. And the gurukuls were something phenomenal. They were centers of learning, of higher learning. These gurukuls would teach astrology, astrophysics, mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, medicine, biology, and various other subjects of phenomenal caliber. And they were quite advanced too. And most of these rishis were experts in martial arts. They were experts in unarmed combat, And they could also be experts in archery, fighting with the spear, sword, the mace, and various other weapons, and experts at riding horses and chariots. And they used to be the people who used to teach the kings how to fight, the kings and the kshatriyas of the time how to fight. Of course, they would never use this art to take a life, but they were experts in the art of war also. Most of them would practice celibacy for maybe hundreds of years, but they were not prude when it came to physical intimacy either. They used to believe that practicing celibacy would increase their focus, improve their focus and concentration. They would have the ability to understand things better and not be waylaid by uh, stray thoughts. And that's why they practice celibacy. But at the same time, occasionally, on various occasions, they would be called on to populate the world as we know it. And not just that, they were objects of desire for the most beautiful apsaras of Devaloka. Why not? Beauty, brains, muscle, and extremely handsome people. So, having given a physical description of some of these rishis, most of these rishis, let's talk about some of them in particular. So, the Saptarishis are seven in number, that's why they are Saptarishis. So, Saptarishis were some of the most important rishis of the time, and we will discuss two of them. So, Saptarishis were Vishwamitra, Vashishta, Jamagdagni, Bharadvaja, Kashyapa, Gautama, and Atri. So, these were the seven great rishis of the time, the Saptarishis, who were said to have gained their knowledge of the Brahman, the knowledge of the cosmos, from the great Adi Yogi Shiva himself. And they probably sat at his feet for hundreds of years or maybe thousands of years and learnt everything that there was to know of the universe from him, for he was a fount of all knowledge. Today we discuss two of these Saptarishis, Gautama and Bharadvaja, who are from the lineage of Angirasa, Maharishi Angirasa. So Maharishi Angirasa was the direct descendant of Brahma and Agni, they say. And it is said that Agni himself gave an amsha, the Agni Deva himself gave an amsha into the birth of Angirasa. And Angirasa was one of the first rishis to propagate the idea of the fire worship. And the homas and the fire worship that has started from those times has started from the knowledge bestowed by Angirasa. And Angirasa had many sons, the two most important among them being Brihaspati and Uttatheya. We had discussed about Brihaspati and Uttatheya in a previous episode when we spoke about the stories of Bhishma which he brought down from Devaloka to Bhuloka. But we shall quickly go past them again. And Angirasa had two children, that is Brihaspati and Uttatheya. Uttatheya was the elder, Brihaspati was the younger one. Both studied, were ardent students, and both studied under him, Angirasa. And Angirasa was a great teacher. Incidentally, even Shukracharya, who later became, or he used to be called Ushanakavi, Shukracharya or Ushanakavi also learnt under Angirasa. And later he became the preceptor of the Asuras. And he was a great student, and Angirasa knew the potential that Shukracharya had. In fact, in the Gita, Krishna tells that among the greatest kavis is Ushana or Shukracharya, acknowledging the greatness of Shukracharya. And so Angirasa taught all these people and somehow was able to give the knowledge of the Sanjeevani to Shukracharya, not to his children, Brihaspati and Uttatheya. Uttatheya himself was a great rishi. He had a beautiful wife, Mamata, and together they had a child who, if you remember the story we told, we'll just quickly recap it. While Mamata was pregnant with that child, Brihaspati tried to force himself on her, and The child screamed out and said, "Stop, don't go ahead, don't do it, for there is no place for more than one of us in the womb." And Brihaspati cursed that child to eternal darkness, and that child was born blind, and that child was Dhirgatamas. And then Dhirgatamas, after that, married Pradveshi and had many children, the eldest of them being Gautama. And Dhirgatamas was an ardent practitioner of the tantric form of practice. Of course, he was an ardent Vedic practitioner also, but he was more inclined towards the tantric form of practice. And as the other rishis in that area didn't like it, they poisoned Pradveshi's mind against Dhirgatamas, and Pradveshi in turn poisoned her children's mind against their own father Dhirgatamas. And then they tied him to the raft and set him down floating on the Ganga. Then over time, Gautama realized his mistake, what he had made. He had come under the influence of his mother and he had committed the sin, and then he atoned for it by doing hundreds of years of intense tapasya and meditation. And then following that, he went and sat at the feet of the Adi Yogi, the Lord Shiva, and learned from him, and finally became a Maharishi. Gautama was a very learned man. It was said that there were many hymns which were written by him, which were then put into the Rig Veda by Veda Vyasa. Gautama also was the one who created the river Godavari, which is why the river Godavari is also known as Gautami. So great was he that Brahma, the creator, yes, we call him the creator, but he didn't really create the universe as we know it. For the Rig Veda itself says that we know not who created the universe. Could be the gods above, could be somebody else. Nobody really knows. For they knew that the universe was actually created from a particle and from a sound. The sound of the pranava, the sound Om. And so coming back to Gautama, seeing his excellent capacity and knowledge, Brahma decided to give Ahilya in marriage to Gautama, because Ahilya, it was said, was so beautiful. She was almost an amsha of Shakti, the force of creation. And with Ahilya, Gautama had many children, the eldest one being Shatananda, who later became the preceptor of King Janaka, who was the father of Sita, the wife of Purushottama Rama. And after Ahilya was turned to stone, we know that story too. Gautama had more children with another wife, and one of them was a remarkable child called Sharadvatha or Shardvana. So Sharadvana or Sharadvatha, as he is called in some texts, was born holding a clutch of arrows in his hand. And it was said that this child Sharadvatha had a remarkable inclination for archery. From a very young age, he didn't concentrate too much on the Vedas and the Shastras and the other theoretical pursuits. But for him, the archery, the skill of archery, the science and art of archery took precedence over everything else. And he would sit day and night releasing arrows one behind the other at targets at different places, and became a master at it. And using his divine abilities, he started attaining the knowledge of the Astras. And it was said that Sharadvatha at one point of time gained the ability to have arrows which would always meet its mark, which would never miss its mark. And it was said that he was gifted these divine arrows that could always quell any foe. There was nobody in all of the universe who could survive such an arrow, such a divine arrow from Sharadvatha. And obviously, as always happens, the one who gets insecure and nervous when somebody attains such great, phenomenal, superhuman strength was always the lord of the king of the Devas, Indra. Indra needn't have worried about Sharadvatha going after him, For Sharadvata had no such madness in him. The madness of power, the madness of wealth, the madness of material possessions. He was just happy losing arrows from his bow one behind the other. But Indra was nervous, and Indra decided that he has to calm down the focus and the attention of Sharadvata. So one day, when Sharadvata was at the banks of a river meditating and increasing his concentration, Indra sent the beautiful Apsara Janapadi to have a bath in that river. And this beautiful Apsara came out of the river after her bath. And she was a sight to behold, obviously. And when Sharadvata saw her, something happened to him. And it is said in the Mahabharata that he got in such a state of exhilaration that he released his seed on a clump of reed next to him. It could also be that they had a brief, intimate affair with each other. But the Mahabharata says that he released his seed as two clumps among the reeds around him. And realizing what he had done, he got nervous and he got scared and he got worried, for he realized that he had lost the control of hundreds of years of celibacy that he had had all this while. And in that nervousness, he ran away from that area, fearing that something would happen to him, for it was a new experience for him. This meeting of this extremely beautiful Apsara Janapadi. And leaving behind his deer skin, his bow and arrows there, Sharadvata ran away. Over time, it is said that this seed which fell as two clumps on the reeds down formed two beautiful children, a boy and a girl. And these children were crying in the reeds at the banks of the river. And at the same time, King Shantanu was hunting in that area. This time he had gone hunting with a small retinue of his closed armed guards. And one of the armed guards heard the children crying and came to investigate and found these two children lying there, a boy and a girl, looked like twins, next to deer skin, a bow and a quiver of arrows. And immediately he went and reported to Shantanu, who immediately said, "Take the children and come, let's go to the palace." And seeing the deer skin and the bow and arrows next to the children, Shantanu deciphered that it must have been a rishi who was well versed in the art of war. For these rishis were excellent in the art of war, they were excellent in unarmed combat. Martial arts were their key. For a lot of the rishis of the time were experts in martial arts. They were quite well versed in unarmed combat, and they would teach these princes and kings and kshatriyas of the time on how to use the bow, archery, spears and swords and all other forms of combat. And Shantanu decided that he will raise these two children in the palace of Hastinapura. And because they were raised under the blessing and the kindness of Shantanu, these two children were called Kripa and Kripi. The boy was Kripa and the girl was Kripi. Kripa himself took to martial arts like a fish takes to water, just like his father. In time, as these children grew, word spread around about this great child, a Brahmana child in the palace of King Shantanu, who was well versed in archery and who was unparalleled in his skill of archery. And over time, Sharadvata came to know that such a child exists in the kingdom of Hastinapur. And he deciphered that these children must be the two children he would have had with the Apsara Janapadi. He came to the palace of Hastinapur and met King Shantanu. He told King Shantanu that these two children were his and that he would like to teach these two children and impart his knowledge to them. As a father, he wanted to teach his son all that he knew about the art of archery. He didn't tell the children that he was their father. Well, there were no reports in the Mahabharata that they knew about it. And if they did know, They were quite comfortable in the palace and didn't want to go back to a itinerant lifestyle like Sharadvata had, moving from place to place. They were quite happy in Hastinapur. And so Sharadvata spent a few years teaching Kripa all that he knew about archery, and Kripa blossomed into a phenomenal archer, one of the best of the land, it is said. Kripi, on the other hand, the one with the short hair, she always kept short hair. Kripi, on the other hand, became well versed in the art of the fire rituals, quite like her ancestor Angirasa. And it was said that Kripi could do marvelous yagyas and could create marvelous results from the fire yagyas which she used to conduct. And over time, Kripa and Kripi grew up in the palace. And when Bhishma realized that these Pandava and Kaurava children were at each other's throats, and around that time the incident at Pramanakoti had happened. Much later, Kripa was quite much older then. And when Bhishma realized that these children are out to get each other, he realized that they need a teacher and a systematic mode of learning. And that was the time he instructed Kripa to teach these children the art of war, and Kripi to teach them the Vedas and all other theoretical pursuits. And so Kripa became the first teacher of the princes of Hastinapur, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, and Kripi became their theoretical teacher. So this was the life of Gautama. And now we come to the other Rishi, the Saptarishi, Bharadvaja. We now discuss the other Saptarishi, Bharadvaja. He too was a descendant of Angirasa, and we shall describe how he descended from Angirasa. So we had described how Brihaspati had tried to force himself on Mamata. Well, he was unsuccessful the first time because she was already with child, Dirgatamas. But there was another time when he was successful, and she bore a child whose father was Brihaspati, not the legitimate father, whose child, and that child was Bharadvaja. Bharadvaja himself learnt under Angirasa. And it is said that Bharadvaja was a keen student, an expert both at Vedas and the Shastras and also the art of war. Bharadvaja over time wrote a huge treatise on Dhanurveda, the art of archery, in which he describes every aspect of archery, and it was a must read for every Kshatriya of the time. He also wrote a book on the health and healing and medicine. For at one time, Bharadvaja realized that Bhuloka was suffering from various ailments and people were falling ill. And these ailments were preventing the people from concentrating on learning the Vedas and the Shastras and the various Angas of the Vedas. And he went to Indra and implored him to give him the knowledge of medicine so that he can bring it down to Bhuloka and teach people how to cure the masses. And Indra himself taught Bharadvaja the art of medicine and Ayurveda. He also instructed the Ashwini brothers, the Devas, who were also well versed in the art of healing, to teach everything they knew to Bharadvaja, and Bharadvaja came down to Bhuloka and wrote a huge treatise on medicine. It is said that Bharadvaja's teachings are shown in the Charaka Samhita, the ultimate book on the Ayurveda and medicine and surgery of ancient India, far before the science of medicine was even contemplated. Bharadvaja also learned from his grandfather various arts of war and the various astras. In addition to his exhaustive collection of notes on medicine, which have at some point of time found its way into the Charaka Samhita, Bharadvaja was a man of multiple interests. He has written books on grammar, In fact, Panini, one of the scholars of grammar, has quoted Bharadwaja extensively. Bharadwaja has also written a lot of books on Niti, economics, and various other subjects that today find its place in a lot of education that we learn today. Brihaspati's father, Angirasa, also taught Bharadwaja the art of the Agneastra, the Astra of Agni. I shall describe the Agneastra quite in detail much later, when the Pandavas narrowly escape burning in the house of Lak and then run away into the forest. But Angirasa taught Bharadwaja the Agnyastra. Angirasa had another student called Agnivesha, who also learnt under the tutelage of Bharadwaja. And Bharadwaja taught Agnivesha the Agnyastra, which was then passed down to various other people through Agnivesha. Bharadwaja also taught Agnivesha all that he learned from Indra. Every part of medicine, surgery, Ayurveda, which Indra and the Ashwini twins taught Bharadwaja, he passed on to Agnivesha. And Agnivesha also learnt under another Saptarishi called Atre. And with this knowledge that Agnivesha had got from Atri and from Bharadwaja, Agnivesha created books, wrote down various books on the art of Ayurveda. And today, Agnivesha is said to be the father of Ayurveda. And it so happened that Bharadwaja was also the father of another great teacher called Drona. We've all heard of Drona, but let me explain to you the birth of Drona. Now it's interesting. In the Mahabharata, the birth of Drona is primarily described by Drona himself to Bhishma when he meets him for the first time. And in this description, Drona explains of how he is born of a river shell at the banks of the river. So the story goes in the Mahabharata that one day Bharadwaja was performing intense tapasya and intense sadhana on the banks of a river. And there came to bathe in that river a beautiful apsara called Grithachi. So what is it that makes these apsaras come to the rivers where these rishis do tapasya? It's a typical which came first. Did the egg come first or the chicken come first? Did the rishi come to the banks of the river to pray or did the apsaras come to the river to bathe first? We would never know. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other. So this beautiful apsara Grithachi came to the river to bathe, and it so happened that Bharadwaja happened to see her. He was enamored by her. And as per the description of Drona, Bharadwaja observed the beautiful apsara Grithachi, and in his acceleration he released his seed, which he immediately held in his kamandalu or pot, which was also called a dhrana. And it was in this pot that the child was born, kind of like in vitro fertilization. And that child, since he was born from a dhrana, was called Drona. And of course, Drona likened that birth to being born in a river shell, because the river shell was obviously more exotic than the pot that the rishi would have. And so the story goes in the Mahabharata that Drona was born from a river shell, from the seed of Bharadwaja without a woman. So a woman did not have a role to play, and there have been many instances in the course of the Mahabharata that Drona takes pride in the fact that he is not born from a woman and he is born from a river shell. There are earlier reports and earlier stories of the birth of Drona, and they mention that the Apsara Grithachi and Bharadwaja actually shared an intimate time together, and hence Drona was born. So Bharadwaja, in his treatise on medicine and surgery and various aspects of the human biology clearly describes that a child has to be born from the seed of a man and the menstrual blood of a woman, and that in the early stages that child forms as an embryo, and this embryo then grows up and then is born as a human being. So, considering that Bharadvaja was a man who described this entire process of birth in detail, it's quite unlikely that he would have just released his seed into a river shell and a child would have been born automatically from it. They would have probably had a intimate relationship, following which the embryo would probably have been transplanted into a large pot, like it happened during the birth of the Kauravas. And it is from there that Drona was born, and hence the name Drona. Drona eventually went on to be the teacher of the Pandavas and the Kauravas and the princes of Hastinapura, the second teacher after Kripa. And so these two beautiful stories describe some of the wondrous lives of the Rishis of Bharatvarsha. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Om Subramanyaya Namaha, Swami Sharanam Ayyappo, Om Gurave Namaha.